The night my daughter-in-law humiliated me. My son never looked me in the eyes. I was standing beside the table where the biggest investors in Chicago sat, wearing the only elegant dress I owned, and the silver brooch my late husband had given me 40 years earlier. Vanessa smiled at the guests and said, "Barbara means well, but she isn't exactly familiar with this world." Everyone laughed softly. I waited for my son Michael to say something. Anything. He picked up his wine glass instead. 3 days later, he lost the biggest business deal of his life. And the strangest part, I never made a single phone call. I never asked anyone for revenge. I simply walked away. If you've ever been made to feel small by your own family, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. Please tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. And if stories about family dignity and second chances speak to your heart, I hope you'll like this video and subscribe so we can spend more evenings together. People often assume that losing your husband is the hardest thing a woman can survive. For me, that wasn't entirely true. The hardest part came afterward. It came when the funeral flowers died, when the neighbors stopped bringing casseroles, when the phone stopped ringing and the bills kept arriving. My name is Barbara Collins. I was 29 years old when my husband Daniel died in a construction accident outside Joliet, Illinois. Michael was 8. One moment, I was a wife planning summer vacations. The next, I was a widow sitting at a kitchen table trying to understand life insurance forms. Daniel had been the steady one. He fixed broken pipes. He changed the oil in the car. He paid the bills on Friday nights while listening to baseball games on the radio. He used to tell me, "Barb, no matter what happens, raise our boy to be kind." At the time, it sounded simple. I had no idea how difficult kindness would become. The morning after Daniel's funeral, Michael climbed into my bed. "Mom," he whispered, "who's going to teach me to throw a baseball now?" I held him so tightly that he began crying. "I will," I told him, and I did. I worked mornings as a school secretary. At night, I cleaned offices downtown. On weekends, I worked at a grocery store. For years, I rarely slept more than 5 hours. I remember driving home at 2 in the morning while drinking coffee from a paper cup just to stay awake. I remember clipping coupons. I remember pretending not to be hungry so Michael could have seconds. There was one winter when our furnace broke. I wore 2 sweaters inside the house. Michael never knew. I wanted him to believe that everything was fine. Children deserve that much. Daniel had left me one thing before he died. A silver brooch. It wasn't expensive. It had belonged to his mother. He gave it to me on our 10th anniversary. "If life ever gets hard," he said, "wear this and remember who you are." I still keep it. Some people save jewelry for special occasions. I saved mine for strength. When Michael entered high school, he became everything his father dreamed he would become. He played basketball. He earned good grades. Teachers loved him. The neighbors called him polite. Every night before bed, I thanked God. Not because life was easy, because my son was becoming a good man. Or at least, I thought he was. College nearly broke us financially. Michael was accepted to Northwestern. He was so excited that he couldn't stop smiling. Then he saw the tuition papers. "I can stay home, Mom." "No, it's too much money. We'll figure it out." I sold my wedding ring that spring. Michael never knew. I told him I had misplaced it. The truth was that his education cost more than my memories, and I was willing to pay. When I drove him to college, he hugged me for nearly a minute. "I'll make you proud." "You already have." For years, he called me every Sunday. He told me about classes, internships, girlfriends, dreams. He wanted to build buildings. He wanted to develop neighborhoods. He wanted to create something lasting. Daniel would have been proud. After graduation, Michael moved back to Chicago. He started working for a commercial real estate company. He worked long hours. He learned quickly. People liked him. He had his father's smile, his father's determination, and for a while, he still had his father's heart. Every Thanksgiving, he came home. Every Christmas, he helped me decorate the tree. Every Mother's Day, he brought flowers. One year, he handed me a card that simply said, "You did both jobs, Mom. Thank you." I cried after he left. Not because I was sad, because I believed every sacrifice had been worth it. But life changes slowly. Sometimes so slowly that you don't notice it. Success arrived. Money arrived. Expensive suits arrived. New friends arrived. The phone calls became shorter. The visits became fewer. His world became larger. Mine became smaller. Still, I never complained. Mothers don't always ask to be included. We simply hope not to be forgotten. The last conversation Daniel and I ever had happened in a hospital room. Machines beeped around us. His hand was cold. His voice was weak. He said, "Promise me something. Anything. If Michael becomes successful, make sure he remembers where he came from." I laughed through tears. "Of course he will." Daniel looked at me for a long moment. "Money changes people." "No, not our son." He squeezed my fingers. "Especially our son." For years, I thought he was wrong. I wanted him to be wrong. Sometimes late at night, I sit in the same kitchen where I once paid bills and worried about rent. The wallpaper is older. The cabinets need paint. The clock still ticks above the stove. And I think about the young woman I used to be. The woman who worked 3 jobs. The woman who buried her husband. The woman who promised a dying man that his son would grow up to be kind. Back then, I believed hard work could solve everything. I believed love was enough. I believed sacrifice always produced gratitude. I know better now. Because the truth is this: you can spend decades building someone's future. You can give them every piece of yourself and still wake up one day to realize they no longer recognize the hands that carried them. At 66 years old, I wasn't afraid of growing old. I wasn't afraid of living alone. I wasn't even afraid of dying. The only thing I feared was discovering that somewhere along the way, my son had forgotten who he really was. And unfortunately, that fear was about to become reality. Looking back now, I don't think Michael changed overnight. People rarely do. They change one small decision at a time. One compromise, one excuse, one moment of silence. The first time I met Vanessa Parker, she arrived 20 minutes late to dinner. Michael had brought her to my house on a Sunday afternoon. I spent the entire morning cooking pot roast, mashed potatoes, apple pie. Daniel had loved apple pie. Michael used to love it too. When Vanessa finally walked through the front door, she was beautiful. Tall, perfect blonde hair, expensive clothes, a smile that seemed practiced. She hugged me lightly. "Mrs. Collins, it's nice to meet you. Please call me Barbara." She looked around my living room, the old furniture, the photographs, the worn carpet. "It's very cozy." Something about the way she said it made me uncomfortable. Michael didn't notice. He couldn't stop looking at her. At dinner, she talked about private schools, country clubs, luxury vacations. Her family owned a chain of medical offices in the suburbs. Her father was a surgeon. Her mother sat on charity boards. It was a world very different from mine. Still, I tried. I asked questions. I listened. I smiled. When I served dessert, Vanessa took one bite. "Oh, I avoid sugar. Michael laughed. Mom still makes enough food for an army. I laughed too, but for the first time in years, my own kitchen felt unfamiliar. After dinner, I found Michael washing dishes. What do you think? He asked. She seems very successful. She's incredible, Mom. He looked happier than I had seen him in years. That should have been enough for me. And perhaps it was, at first. The wedding happened 18 months later. It was held at a country club outside Chicago. Everything was elegant. White flowers, string musicians, expensive wine. I remember sitting alone before the ceremony. Most of Vanessa's family sat together. They spoke about investments, vacation homes, business opportunities. I didn't know what to say. Michael came into the room before the ceremony. He adjusted his tie. Mom, you okay? I'm fine. He kissed my forehead. I love you. I believed him. During the reception, Vanessa's mother approached me. Michael is moving into a very different world. I smiled politely. I'm happy for him. She nodded. Sometimes people have to leave certain things behind to grow. I knew exactly what she meant. I simply pretended I didn't. After the wedding, changes began slowly. Sunday calls became monthly calls. Monthly calls became occasional texts. Instead of hearing, "How are you, Mom?" I heard, "I'm busy. We have clients tonight. We'll visit soon." Soon became 6 months, then 8. One Christmas, Michael called 2 days before the holiday. We're spending Christmas in Aspen. I looked at the tree already decorated, his favorite ornaments still hanging. Oh, we'll celebrate later. We never did. The following Mother's Day flowers arrived from a florist. There was no card, no phone call, only a receipt with his assistant's name. I sat at my kitchen table for nearly an hour. I told myself successful people get busy. I told myself adulthood changes priorities. I told myself not to be selfish. Then one afternoon, Michael invited me to lunch. He chose a restaurant downtown. When I arrived, he was wearing a $1,000 suit, a watch I couldn't pronounce. He looked important, older, tired. He ordered for both of us, something he had never done before. Halfway through lunch, he said, "Vanessa thinks you should move closer to us." That sounds nice. Maybe a senior community. I looked at him. I'm 66, Michael. I know. I just mean somewhere easier. Easier for whom? He didn't answer. I suddenly realized he wasn't asking. He was presenting an idea that someone else had given him. I changed the subject. When lunch ended, he hugged me quickly. His phone rang before he reached the parking lot. He answered immediately. He never looked back. Months later, I attended one of his company events. It was the first time I met his business associates. Vanessa introduced people. This is David. This is Susan. This is our investor group. When she reached me, she paused. And this is Michael's mother. Not Barbara, not Mrs. Collins, not even family, simply Michael's mother. I felt like an old photograph someone forgot to remove from a shelf. On the drive home, I cried. Not because Vanessa disliked me. That was obvious. I cried because Michael didn't notice. Or perhaps he did. And chose silence. The hardest moment came one Saturday morning. I called Michael. His voicemail answered. I left a message. 2 days passed. Then 3. Finally, he returned my call. Sorry, Mom. Things have been crazy. I understand. There was a pause. Then he said, Vanessa thinks sometimes you worry too much. I felt my chest tighten. Does Vanessa know how much I worry? No, but does Vanessa know what it feels like to bury your husband? Mom, does she know what it feels like to work 3 jobs? He became quiet. Finally, he said, "You're making this harder than it needs to be." Those words stayed with me because I had heard them before. People often say that when they don't want to feel guilty. That night, I took out Daniel's photograph. It sat beside my bed. I still spoke to him sometimes. Perhaps widows never stop doing that. I touched the frame. Our boy is changing. The room remained silent, but I remembered Daniel's final warning. Money changes people, especially our son. I didn't want to believe it. I kept making excuses. Success creates pressure. Marriage requires compromise. Business demands sacrifice. But deep down, another truth had begun to grow. Michael wasn't simply busy. He was becoming embarrassed. Embarrassed by my small house, my old car, my simple clothes, my ordinary life. And Vanessa encouraged it. She built a world where appearances mattered, where expensive restaurants meant success, where old neighborhoods meant failure, where mothers like me belonged somewhere out of sight. Yet even then, I never imagined things could become worse. I never imagined that one dinner invitation would change everything. Because one Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang. Michael's name appeared on the screen. His voice sounded cheerful. "Mom, I want you to come to dinner next Friday." I smiled. "Really? It's important. What are we celebrating?" There was a brief pause. Then he said, "I want you to see how far we've come." At the time, those words made me proud. I had no idea they would eventually break my heart. 3 days after Michael invited me to dinner, I still felt excited. At 66, excitement doesn't come often. Your life becomes predictable. You shop on Tuesdays. You pay bills on Fridays. You water the flowers every morning. Then suddenly your son calls and says he wants you beside him during an important evening. For the first time in months, I felt needed. I told my friend Linda about it during breakfast. "He wants me there for a business dinner." She smiled. "Maybe he's finally realizing how much you've done." "Maybe." She stirred her coffee. "Are you nervous?" "A little." Linda had known me since high school. She looked at me for a moment. "Barbara, don't spend the entire evening trying to impress people." I laughed. "I don't even know how." "Good." I came home feeling lighter. For several days, I thought about the dinner. What would Michael tell his business partners? Would he introduce me proudly? Would he finally let me see the life he had built? Part of me wanted Daniel to see it too. Friday morning arrived. The weather forecast predicted rain. The sky over Chicago was gray. Around 10 o'clock, my phone rang. Vanessa. She rarely called me directly. "Hello, Barbara." "Good morning." Her voice sounded unusually polite. "I wanted to discuss tonight." "Of course." There was a pause. "The investors attending are very important." "I understand." "They come from old money." I remained quiet. "They're used to a certain environment." "I see." Another pause. "I think simple conversation would probably be best." "I'm sorry." "I mean, perhaps avoid discussing difficult subjects." "What subjects?" "You know, Daniel's accident, financial struggles, things like that." I felt my fingers tighten around the phone. "Those things are my life, Vanessa." "I know. I just don't want Michael distracted." The words sat between us. I looked out the kitchen window. Rain had begun to fall. "I would never hurt my son." "Of course not." "But appearances matter." There it was, the truth. She continued, "And maybe wear something conservative." I almost laughed. At 66, everything I owned was conservative. "I'll do my best." "Thank you." The call ended. For several minutes, I simply stood in my kitchen. Part of me wanted to cancel. Another part remembered Michael's voice. I want you there. I chose my son. That afternoon, I opened my closet. There weren't many choices. One navy dress, one black dress, one gray dress. I selected the navy one. Daniel had always liked it. As I ironed it, memories returned. Anniversaries, church services, graduations, funerals. Clothes become witnesses to our lives. I took out the silver brooch. The small piece of jewelry rested inside a velvet box. 40 years old, slightly worn, still beautiful. I remembered the night Daniel gave it to me. We had gone to dinner at a tiny restaurant. We couldn't afford much. When I opened the box, I laughed. "It's beautiful," he smiled. "It belonged to my mother." "Daniel, this must be worth something." He shook his head. "Not money." He fastened it onto my dress. "Wear it when you need strength." I touched the brooch now. Maybe I needed strength. Maybe I simply needed courage. At 4 o'clock, Michael called. "Everything okay?" "Of course." "You'll love the restaurant." "What kind of place is it?" "Very nice." He hesitated. "Mom?" "Yes." "Vanessa can be a little stressed tonight." I felt my stomach sink. "She already called." Silence. "What did she say?" "Nothing important." Another pause. "I'm trying to close a very big deal." "I'm proud of you." "It's the biggest opportunity of my career." "I know." He lowered his voice. "Just try to go with the flow tonight." There it was again. Another warning. Not from Vanessa. From my own son. I wanted to ask him a question. "Are you embarrassed by me?" Instead, I said, "I'll be fine." After we hung up, I sat alone in my living room. The old clock ticked. The house felt quiet. I looked at Daniel's photograph. "I think something is wrong." Of course he couldn't answer. At 6 o'clock, I started getting ready. I fixed my hair, applied lipstick, put on pearl earrings. When I attached the silver brooch to my dress, my hands trembled slightly. Outside, rain continued falling. Chicago traffic moved slowly. The restaurant was downtown, one of the most expensive places in the city. I had never been there. While driving, I remembered Michael as a child. His baseball games, school concerts, science fairs. Every important moment of his life. I had never missed one. Tonight felt important too. I wanted him to look at me and see his mother. Not a problem, not an embarrassment. Simply his mother. When I arrived, luxury surrounded me. Valets, glass walls, soft lighting, expensive cars, men in tailored suits, women wearing jewelry worth more than my house. For a moment, I considered turning around. Then I heard Daniel's voice. "Remember who you are." Inside, the hostess smiled. "Name, please." "Barbara Collins." She checked the reservation. "Oh, you're with Mr. Michael Collins." The way she said his name told me something. Michael belonged here. I wasn't sure that I did. An elevator carried me upstairs. The private dining room overlooked the city. Chicago lights stretched into the darkness. People stood talking. Wine glasses, laughter, business conversations. And then I saw Michael. He looked handsome, confident, successful. For one brief moment, he smiled exactly like the little boy who used to run into my arms after school. "Mom." He hugged me. Not long, but enough. "You made it." "Of course." Vanessa approached. Her eyes moved from my shoes to my dress. Finally, They stopped at the silver brooch. "What is that?" "My husband's." She forced a smile. "It's very vintage." Michael looked uncomfortable. One of the investors turned toward us, a tall man with gray hair, calm eyes, confident posture. Vanessa immediately smiled. "Robert, this is Barbara." The man extended his hand. "It's nice to meet you." His eyes briefly fell to the brooch. For a second, something changed in his expression. Recognition, confusion, perhaps surprise. But before he could say anything, Vanessa interrupted. "We should all sit down." I didn't know it then. But Robert Hayes had just noticed the one thing that would eventually change all our lives. The private dining room overlooked the Chicago skyline. Below us, thousands of lights covered the city. Cars moved like tiny streams of gold. Inside the room, everything felt expensive. Crystal glasses, white tablecloths, soft piano music. I suddenly became very aware of my age, my dress, my hands, my shoes. Everyone else seemed to belong there. I wasn't sure that I did. Michael pulled out a chair for me. "Sit here, Mom." I thanked him. Vanessa sat beside Robert Hayes. Michael sat across from me. There were 6 people at the table, 2 investors, a company attorney, Robert, Vanessa, Michael, and me. The waiter poured wine. I asked for water. Vanessa smiled politely. "Barbara doesn't drink." One investor laughed. "Smart woman." I smiled. I stopped enjoying wine years ago. The conversation quickly turned to business, commercial properties, development projects, investment numbers, markets, profits. I listened quietly. Michael spoke with confidence. He looked impressive, confident, successful. This was the boy I had once driven to school every morning. Now he spoke about millions of dollars as casually as weather. Part of me felt proud. Another part felt very far away. At one point, Robert looked toward me. "So, Barbara Michael tells us you raised him by yourself." I nodded. "Mostly. That couldn't have been easy." "It wasn't." Vanessa immediately interrupted. "Barbara is very modest." She laughed softly. "Michael really built everything himself." Something inside me shifted. I wasn't looking for credit. I never had been. But her words felt deliberate. Robert looked at me. I simply smiled. Michael said nothing. Dinner arrived. Steak, vegetables, wine. Conversation continued. The attorney asked Michael how he developed such discipline. I looked toward my son. For a second, I thought he might mention his father, or perhaps the years we struggled. Instead, he said, "I learned early that success depends on leaving the past behind." The words landed heavily. Leaving the past behind. I suddenly felt cold. Robert took a sip of wine. "What do you mean by that?" Michael smiled. "You can't grow if you stay attached to old ways of thinking." Vanessa nodded. "Exactly." She turned toward me. "Barbara still lives in the same little house?" I remained silent. "We keep telling her to move somewhere more appropriate." One investor laughed politely. "Parents can be stubborn," Vanessa continued. "She refuses to let go of the past." I looked down at my hands. The silver brooch rested quietly against my dress. Robert's eyes noticed it again. He said nothing. The conversation moved forward. But Vanessa wasn't finished. She never was. When dessert arrived, one of the investors asked where I lived. I answered, "A small neighborhood in Naperville." Vanessa smiled. "It's very modest." The word modest again. as if my life needed explanation. I took a sip of water. The investor said, "You must be proud of your son." "I am." Vanessa laughed softly. "Michael had to work hard to escape small-town thinking." I looked directly at her. I never thought kindness was small. The table became quiet. She smiled. "Of course not." But I could see something behind her eyes, something sharp, something determined. She wanted me uncomfortable. She wanted me quiet. And perhaps she expected me to disappear. Robert spoke again. "What did your husband do, Barbara?" "He was a construction engineer. He passed away when Michael was 8. Robert nodded slowly. "I'm sorry." "Thank you." Before I could continue, Vanessa interrupted again. "Barbara still talks about him constantly." She laughed. "Sometimes I think Michael has had to carry a lot emotionally." That one hurt, because it wasn't true. I had spent my entire life trying to protect my son from pain. Michael shifted slightly in his chair. But once again, he remained silent. Silence can be louder than insults, especially from your own child. The waiter removed the dessert plates. Coffee arrived. The business discussion returned. Robert asked several questions about Michael's company. Michael answered carefully. Everything seemed to be going well. Then one investor asked me, what was Michael like as a child? For the first time all evening, I smiled. He was kind. Michael looked up. He shared his lunch at school. I continued. He cried when stray animals were hurt. The attorney smiled. Really? Oh, yes. I laughed quietly. He once spent 2 hours helping an elderly neighbor shovel snow. For a brief moment, I saw the old Michael, the little boy, the good boy. Then Vanessa spoke. Michael has changed quite a bit since then. She turned toward the table. Thankfully, nobody laughed. She continued anyway. Business isn't really a place for emotional people. I looked at her. Kindness isn't weakness. She smiled. No, but sentiment doesn't close deals. The room became quiet again. Robert set down his coffee cup. His eyes moved between us. Michael finally spoke. Vanessa. But he didn't finish the sentence. He simply stopped. That was his chance. His first chance. He let it pass. Vanessa leaned back in her chair. Barbara, I hope you don't take this the wrong way. I already knew I would. The people Michael works with live very differently. I said nothing. Sometimes older generations don't understand modern business. The attorney looked uncomfortable. One investor glanced away. Michael stared at the table. I could feel my heartbeat. She continued. Michael has worked incredibly hard to create a different life. She smiled directly at me. A more sophisticated life. There it was, the word she had been building toward all evening. Sophisticated. As if my life had been something shameful. As if widowhood, hard work, sacrifice, love were somehow embarrassing. I looked at Michael. Our eyes met. I waited. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. Please, just one sentence. That's your mother. Please. He lowered his eyes, and in that moment, something inside me broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly, like old glass. Robert suddenly spoke. I think where we come from matters. Vanessa smiled. Of course. He looked directly at me. Your husband was an engineer. Yes. And his name was Daniel Collins. I blinked. Yes. For a moment, Robert seemed distracted, almost troubled. He looked at the silver brooch again. His face changed slightly, but before he could speak further, Vanessa laughed. Barbara still carries pieces of the past everywhere. She pointed toward my brooch. Even that old thing has a story. The entire table looked at me. I gently touched the brooch. Yes. Vanessa smiled. What is it? I looked at Michael. He still wouldn't look at me. Then I quietly answered. It reminds me who I am. No one said anything, but Robert Hayes stared at the brooch as if he had seen it before, and for the first time that evening, I realized something unexpected. Someone at that table was remembering the past, and it wasn't my son. For several seconds after I answered Robert's question, nobody spoke. My fingers rested on the silver brooch. The room suddenly felt smaller. Robert looked at me carefully, almost as if he were trying to remember something. Vanessa broke the silence. It's just an old family piece. She smiled. Barbara keeps everything. I looked at her. The word everything stayed in my mind. Everything. As if memories were a burden. As if love had an expiration date. Robert leaned forward. How long have you had it? I touched the brooch. 40 years. He nodded slowly. My father had a friend years ago. No one spoke. He wore something very similar. I felt my heart beat harder. My husband was an engineer. Robert looked thoughtful. What company? Before I could answer, Vanessa laughed. Robert, we're making you listen to family history. One investor smiled politely. We all have family stories. Vanessa took a sip of wine. Some are just more relevant than others. Again, another small cut, another insult disguised as conversation. I looked toward Michael. He shifted in his seat. His jaw tightened, but he still said nothing. Robert finally turned back toward the business discussion. Yet I could tell he was distracted. His eyes occasionally returned to the brooch, and every time they did, something changed in his expression. The waiter brought another round of coffee. The conversation became more serious. Numbers, contracts, future projects. Robert asked Michael several difficult questions. My son answered confidently. I could hear the pride in his voice. I remembered helping him practice speeches in high school. He used to stand in our living room, nervous, holding index cards. I would sit on the couch. Speak louder. He would smile. Mom, you're the only person here. Someday there will be more. There certainly were now. Yet somehow he seemed farther away than ever. One investor asked Michael, "What motivates you?" Michael smiled. I've always wanted to build something bigger than where I came from. Vanessa nodded proudly. Robert remained silent. I lowered my eyes. Bigger than where I came from. Perhaps he didn't realize how those words sounded. Or perhaps he did. Vanessa looked toward me. Michael has worked very hard to reinvent himself. The attorney asked, What do you mean? She laughed softly. Oh, we all reinvent ourselves. Nobody answered. She continued. We can't let our past define us forever. Her eyes met mine. For the first time all evening, I understood. This wasn't about business. This wasn't about appearances. Vanessa wanted everyone in that room to know that Michael had risen above me, above his childhood, above his family, above his mother. And Michael was allowing it. The investor beside Robert turned toward me. So, Barbara, did you ever work in business? I worked at a school, Vanessa smiled. And she cleaned offices at night. I looked at her. She smiled politely. As a single mother. The investor nodded respectfully. That sounds difficult. Before I could answer, Vanessa said, "It definitely gave Michael motivation." The attorney frowned slightly. "Motivation?" Vanessa laughed. "To succeed?" The room became quiet. I realized then that she wanted my struggles to sound embarrassing, as if poverty had somehow stained us, as if hard work were shameful. Robert set down his coffee. "My father owned a machine shop." Everyone looked toward him. "We struggled when I was young." Vanessa smiled politely. "That's inspiring." He looked directly at her. "It taught me gratitude." His voice had changed. Something colder. Something sharper. Vanessa noticed. So did Michael. Robert continued. "I've learned that people who forget their beginnings often lose perspective." Nobody spoke. For the first time all evening, Vanessa seemed uncomfortable. Michael cleared his throat. "Our company values relationships." Robert looked at him. "Do you—" The question hung in the air. Michael smiled awkwardly. "Of course." Robert nodded. "Good." Another silence. I began to feel tired, not physically, emotionally. The entire evening had become exhausting. I wanted to go home. I wanted my kitchen, my old clock, my photographs, my quiet life. Instead, I sat there while people discussed millions of dollars, and somehow I felt poorer than I had ever felt in my life. Then it happened. One of the investors asked me a simple question. "What are you most proud of?" I smiled. "My son." Michael looked up. "I raised him to be kind." Vanessa laughed, actually laughed. The sound was soft, but everyone heard it. "I'm sorry," she said. I looked at her. She shook her head. "It's just that business can be a little more complicated than kindness." Nobody responded. She continued. "Michael had to learn some hard lessons." I felt my chest tighten. "What lessons?" She smiled. "That emotions don't build companies." I looked directly at her. "Neither does cruelty." The room froze. Michael finally spoke. "Mom." Only one word. Mom. Not because he wanted to defend me, because he wanted me to stop. Vanessa sat straighter. "I'm only being honest," I answered quietly. "So am I." She looked around the table. "I don't mean any disrespect." But she did. Everyone knew it. Robert knew it. The investors knew it. Michael knew it. She leaned toward me. "Barbara, this world is very competitive." I remained silent. Sometimes people from different backgrounds don't understand what it takes. The words landed heavily. Different backgrounds. I finally understood. She wasn't speaking to me. She was speaking about me. As if I weren't sitting there. As if I were some unfortunate relative who had wandered into the wrong room. I looked at Michael. This was his moment. His final opportunity. He could stop it. One sentence. That's enough. Instead, he lowered his eyes. Again. And in that instant, I realized something painful. My son wasn't silent because he was afraid. He was silent because he agreed. Maybe not completely. Maybe not intentionally. But enough. Enough to let his wife humiliate me. Enough to protect the deal instead of his mother. Robert suddenly spoke. "Mrs. Collins." I turned toward him. "May I ask one question?" "Of course." He pointed gently toward the brooch. "Where exactly did your husband get that?" Before I could answer, Vanessa sighed. "Robert, honestly, we're discussing jewelry now." He never looked at her. He looked only at me, and for the first time all evening I saw something in his eyes. Recognition. Shock. Memory. The kind of expression people make when the past unexpectedly walks into the room. I opened my mouth to answer, and I had no idea that what I was about to say would change everything. For a moment, nobody moved. Robert Hayes was still looking at my brooch. The entire table had become strangely quiet. I could hear glasses clinking somewhere behind us. The city lights outside the windows seemed distant. I finally answered. My husband received it from his mother. Robert frowned. Did he ever work in Texas? The question surprised me. No. He leaned forward. Did he ever help a man named Thomas Hayes? My heart skipped. Thomas Hayes. I had not heard that name in nearly 30 years. Daniel had mentioned him only a few times. A small machine shop owner, a struggling businessman, a man who had nearly lost everything. I looked at Robert. Thomas Hayes was your father? Robert slowly nodded. The room suddenly felt very still. Vanessa looked confused. Michael looked surprised. I spoke quietly. Your father and my husband worked together on a project years ago. Robert said nothing. I continued. There was a construction collapse. He nodded. My father told me that story. Daniel had never spoken much about it. Only once. Late one evening, Michael had been asleep. Daniel sat in our kitchen drinking coffee. He said a subcontractor had nearly gone bankrupt after an accident. Insurance delays, lawsuits, debt. Daniel had spent months helping him solve engineering problems and save the business. He never accepted payment. He never talked about it again. Robert's eyes never left me. My father kept a photograph. I felt cold. He spoke about your husband until the day he died. Vanessa forced a smile. What a small world. Robert ignored her. He also mentioned a silver brooch. My fingers touched it again. My father said Daniel's wife always wore it. I couldn't speak. Some memories arrive so suddenly that they steal your breath. Daniel had indeed met Thomas and his wife once. I had worn the brooch that evening. 40 years had passed. And somehow this man sitting across from me remembered. Vanessa laughed softly. Well, that's certainly interesting. Robert turned toward her. His expression had changed. He no longer looked like an investor. He looked like a man remembering an old debt. My father used to say that Daniel Collins saved our family business. Michael looked surprised. What? Robert nodded. He refused payment. I lowered my eyes. That sounded like Daniel. Robert continued. He told my father that someday kindness would return. The room became silent. For the first time all evening, nobody spoke about money. Nobody spoke about investments. Nobody spoke about business. Only kindness. Only character. Only memory. And then Vanessa made the mistake that changed everything. She smiled. That's a wonderful story. Nobody answered. She continued. But obviously, business today is very different. Robert looked at her. She smiled politely. I mean, sentiment and gratitude are beautiful, but business decisions have to be practical. Robert's face became unreadable. Michael shifted uncomfortably. I wanted the evening to end. I wanted to leave, but Vanessa kept talking. She always did. She laughed lightly. Barbara still lives very much in the past. My hands folded quietly in my lap. Sometimes she doesn't understand the world Michael works in. One investor looked down. The attorney adjusted his glasses. Nobody wanted to participate, but nobody stopped her. Not even my son. Vanessa turned toward me. I hope you know I don't mean offense. I looked at her calmly. What do you mean then? She seemed surprised that I had answered. I just think Michael has worked very hard to become who he is. I nodded. He has. And sometimes family can make progress difficult. The words entered the room like cold air. Michael finally looked up. Vanessa. She ignored him. People judge. Nobody spoke. She continued. And investors expect certain things. Robert slowly placed his coffee cup onto the table. His voice was calm. What things? Vanessa smiled. Professionalism. Robert nodded. Respect. She hesitated. Of course. He looked directly at her. Does that include respect for parents? Nobody moved. Vanessa laughed nervously. Naturally. Robert looked toward Michael. And family? Michael swallowed. Yes. Robert nodded again. The silence became almost unbearable. Then Vanessa made one final mistake. She looked toward me and smiled. Barbara is very sweet. She paused. But she simply doesn't belong in this world. Nobody breathed. Nobody moved. I looked at my son. This was his moment. His last chance. He could stop her. He could say, She's my mother. Instead, he remained silent. That silence hurt more than every word Vanessa had spoken. Because insults from strangers fade. Silence from your child stays forever. I slowly stood. The movement surprised everyone. Vanessa looked uncomfortable. Michael immediately spoke. Mom. My voice remained calm. Very calm. The calm that comes after something inside you finally breaks. I looked at Vanessa. You are right about one thing. The room was completely silent. I don't belong in this world. Vanessa looked relieved. I turned toward Michael. I raised my son to respect people. I looked at Robert. My husband believed character mattered more than money. Then I looked at everyone at the table. And perhaps that world no longer exists here. Michael stood. Mom, sit down. I shook my head. For the first time all evening, my son looked frightened. Please. I looked directly into his eyes. I wanted to see the little boy. The child who once cried over injured birds. The teenager who hugged me before college. The young man who wrote thank you cards. Instead, I saw a businessman. A man worried about a deal. A man afraid of embarrassment. And suddenly, I understood. Vanessa had not changed Michael completely. She had simply revealed who he had become. I picked up my purse. Robert stood immediately. Mrs. Collins? I smiled softly. Please sit. Michael reached for my arm. Mom? I gently stepped back. No. The word surprised him, because mothers rarely say no. We forgive, we wait, we excuse. But not tonight. I looked at my son. I spent my life teaching you kindness. My voice trembled slightly. But tonight, you taught me something. His face fell. I continued. Silence can be cruel, too. Nobody spoke. Vanessa looked pale. Robert stood beside his chair. The investors avoided eye contact. I attached my coat. Then I touched the silver brooch. Daniel's gift. Daniel's strength. Daniel's memory. I looked one last time at my son. I hope your deal is worth it. Then I walked toward the door, and behind me for the first time all evening, Robert Hayes spoke. Mrs. Collins. I turned. His eyes were full of something I could not yet understand. Respect, gratitude, perhaps even regret. He said only 4 words. We need to talk. For a few seconds after Robert spoke, nobody moved. We need to talk. His voice was calm, respectful, almost personal. I stood beside the table holding my coat. Michael looked confused. Vanessa looked nervous. The investors exchanged quick glances. I smiled politely. Perhaps another time. Robert nodded. I would appreciate that. Michael stepped toward me. Mom, please don't leave. His voice sounded different, not protective, not loving, worried. Because Robert Hayes had just changed. And everyone in the room could feel it. I looked at my son. For a brief moment, I saw fear in his eyes. Not fear of losing me. Fear of losing something else. The deal. I spoke quietly. I'm tired. Vanessa forced a smile. I'm sure this evening became emotional. I looked directly at her. No. She seemed surprised. I simply remembered something. What? That self-respect matters. Nobody answered. I turned toward Robert. It was nice meeting you. He nodded. The honor was mine. The words landed heavily, because moments earlier, Vanessa had made me feel invisible. Now the most important man in the room had stood when I stood. Michael followed me toward the elevator. The hallway felt strangely quiet. The doors closed behind us. For the first time all evening, we were alone. He rubbed his forehead. Mom, what happened in there? I stared at him. What happened? Vanessa didn't mean. I interrupted him. Stop. He looked surprised. Mom! No. The elevator descended slowly. I could hear the machinery, the soft music, my own breathing. I finally looked at him. Do you know what hurt me tonight? He remained silent. It wasn't Vanessa. His eyes narrowed. She was rude. Yes. She insulted you. Yes. Then what? I felt tears forming. You let her. The elevator doors opened. The hotel lobby stood before us. People walked by. Nobody noticed us. Michael lowered his voice. You know how important tonight is. I laughed quietly. Not because it was funny, because I finally understood. Important. That word again. The deal. The investors. The business. Everything important. Everything except me. I adjusted my coat. When your father died, you cried for 3 days. His eyes lifted. You wouldn't sleep alone. He said nothing. You held my hand every night. A young couple walked past us. Neither of us moved. I continued. You once told me I was your hero. His face changed. Mom. And tonight you couldn't say one sentence. He swallowed. I didn't want to create a scene. The words hit me harder than I expected, because that was the truth. He wasn't protecting me. He was protecting the evening, protecting appearances, protecting money. I nodded slowly. Then you succeeded. I walked toward the entrance. Rain still fell outside. The valet brought my car. Michael followed me. Can we talk tomorrow? I opened the car door. I don't know. Please. I looked at him one last time. The boy I raised. The man standing before me. Both existed at once. And somehow they felt like strangers. Good night, Michael. I got into my car. He stood in the rain. He didn't stop me. He didn't apologize. He simply watched me leave. The drive home took nearly 40 minutes. Rain hit the windshield. Traffic moved slowly. I could barely see the road through my tears. At one red light, I finally cried. Not quietly. Not gracefully. I cried like the young widow I once was. Like the woman who sold her wedding ring. Like the mother who worked nights. Because grief sometimes returns wearing different faces. Years ago, I lost my husband. Tonight, it felt as though I had lost my son. When I finally reached home, the house was dark. I sat in the driveway for several minutes. I couldn't move. The silence felt enormous. Inside, I turned on this kitchen light. The old clock still ticked. Everything remained exactly the same. Only I had changed. I removed the brooch, placed it carefully on the table. Daniel's photograph stood nearby. I sat beside it. I failed. The words came out softly. I couldn't protect him. Of course there was no answer, only silence. Then my phone rang. Michael. I stared at the screen. I did not answer. A minute later, another call, then another, finally a message. Mom, please call me. I set the phone down. 10 minutes later, another message. Robert asked about Dad. Did you know him? I closed my eyes. So that was it. The conversation had already begun. The deal had followed him home. An hour later, the phone rang again. This time, it was Vanessa. I almost ignored it, but I answered. Hello? Her voice was cold. What exactly did you tell Robert? I sat quietly. Nothing. Something happened. I left. She sighed heavily. He seemed upset. I wouldn't know. Barbara, this deal is very important. There it was again. Important. More important than dignity. More important than family. I spoke calmly. I didn't do anything. She lowered her voice. If Michael loses this deal, I interrupted her. If Michael loses this deal, it won't be because of me. Silence. She finally said, You embarrassed him. For several seconds, I could not speak. Then I answered. No. I looked at Daniel's photograph. He embarrassed himself. She hung up. The house became quiet again. Midnight came. Rain continued outside. I made tea, sat beside the window, and thought about Robert Hayes, his face, his father's name, the surprise in his eyes. Something important had happened tonight, something larger than a business meeting. I could feel it. Near 1 o'clock in the morning, my phone rang again. An unknown number. Normally, I would not answer, but something told me to pick up. Hello. A familiar voice spoke. Mrs. Collins. It was Robert. I apologize for calling so late. I sat upright. That's all right. There was a pause. Then he said, I found my father's old photographs. My heart began to beat faster. And your husband is in them. Outside, thunder rolled above the city. Robert continued. My father owed Daniel Collins everything. I could not speak. His voice became softer. There are some things you deserve to know. I looked at the silver brooch resting beside me. For 40 years, it had simply been Daniel's gift. Now suddenly, it seemed connected to something much larger, something my husband had never told me. And before we ended the call, Robert said something that kept me awake until sunrise. I don't believe your husband ever received the gratitude he deserved. I barely slept that night. After my phone call with Robert Hayes, I sat in my kitchen until almost dawn. The rain finally stopped. The house became quiet again. Yet my mind refused to rest. Daniel, Thomas Hayes, old photographs, old promises. None of it made sense. For 37 years, my husband had been gone, and suddenly, his past was walking back into my life. At 7 o'clock the next morning, my phone rang. Michael. Again. I let it ring. A minute later, another call, then another. Finally, I answered. His voice sounded exhausted. Mom. Good morning. We need to talk. I poured coffee. I don't think so. Please. His breathing was heavy. What happened after you left? I looked out my kitchen window. The world looked ordinary. Birds, trees, morning sunlight, yet nothing felt ordinary anymore. You were there. No, I mean, after. I remained quiet. Robert stayed another hour. My heart tightened, and he was different. I said nothing. He barely discussed the project. I slowly sat down. He kept asking about Dad. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, I asked, "What did you tell him?" "The truth." "And what truth is that?" "That Dad died when I was young." He hesitated, and I didn't know anything else. That sentence hurt, because it was true. Michael knew almost nothing about his father. Success had filled the empty spaces. Business had replaced memories. He no longer knew the man whose name he carried. Michael continued. Mom, who was Thomas Hayes? I looked at Daniel's photograph. A friend. Apparently more than a friend. I suppose so. He sounded frustrated. Robert acted like Dad saved his family. I remembered Daniel sitting at our kitchen table decades earlier. He had simply said, "Some people need help." Nothing more. That was Daniel. He never kept score. He never expected repayment. Michael spoke again. Mom. Yes. Did you tell Robert anything? There it was. The question. Not, are you okay? Not, did Vanessa hurt you? Not, can you forgive me? Only, did you say something? I closed my eyes. No. Another silence. Vanessa thinks. I interrupted him. I don't care what Vanessa thinks. He became quiet. The old Barbara would never have said that. The old Barbara avoided conflict. The old Barbara protected everyone's feelings. But something had changed. I finally asked, Michael, why didn't you defend me? Silence. Long silence. Then, I didn't want things to get worse. They already were worse. I was trying to protect the evening. And who was protecting me? No answer. I heard him breathing. Finally he said, I'm sorry you felt hurt. Those words. People say them when they don't want responsibility. I'm sorry you felt hurt. Not I'm sorry I hurt you. There is a difference. A very big difference. I ended the conversation. Call me when you're ready to tell the truth. He sounded confused. What truth? The truth about what happened last night. I hung up. At 10 o'clock, Robert called. Mrs. Collins. Good morning. Would you have lunch with me? I hesitated. Why? Because I believe our families have unfinished business. The words stayed with me. Unfinished business. For years I believed Daniel's story had ended. Perhaps it hadn't. We agreed to meet the following day. After the call ended, I noticed something strange. I felt calm, for the first time since the dinner. Meanwhile, somewhere downtown, Michael's world was beginning to change. He called again that afternoon. This time his voice sounded different. Robert postponed our meeting. My heart sank slightly. When? Until next week. That surprised me. The deal had been scheduled for Friday, only 2 days away. Did he explain? No. I remained quiet. He just said he wanted time. Michael sounded frightened now. Real fear. Business fear. The kind men rarely show. This project is worth almost $30 million. I said nothing. We've been working on it for over a year. Again, silence. Then he asked, would you talk to him? I felt cold. There it was. The real reason. Not reconciliation, not regret, fear. I answered softly. No. Mom, no. You don't understand. I almost laughed. No, Michael. My voice remained calm. You don't understand. He lowered his voice. If this falls apart, I interrupted him. If what falls apart? The deal. No. I paused. The deal isn't falling apart. He became silent. What is falling apart is your understanding of what matters. He said nothing, because perhaps he already knew. That evening, Vanessa called me. I almost didn't answer, but I did. Her voice was tense. Barbara. Vanessa. We need to fix this. I looked around my quiet living room. Fix. Interesting word. What needs fixing? The situation. What situation? She sighed. Robert is pulling away. I remained silent. He canceled dinner tomorrow. Again silence. She continued. Michael is extremely upset. I could hear genuine fear. Not sadness. Fear. Money was slipping away. Reputation was slipping away. The future they planned was slipping away. And suddenly, I mattered again. I asked one question. Why did you humiliate me? She hesitated. I didn't. You did. I was only trying to help Michael. I laughed quietly. By insulting his mother. It wasn't like that. What was it like? She said nothing. I continued. You wanted everyone to know I wasn't good enough. No. Then why? Silence. Long silence. Finally, I didn't want people judging him. There it was. The truth. I sat quietly. You thought I would embarrass him. I thought people might misunderstand. I looked at Daniel's photograph. And suddenly, I realized something. Vanessa never understood people like us. She thought poverty was shameful. Hard work was embarrassing. Small homes were failures. She measured people by appearances. Daniel measured people by character. Robert Hayes apparently did too. I finally spoke. You judged me before anyone else did. She didn't answer. Then she asked, will you speak to Robert? No. Please. No. Michael needs this. I closed my eyes. Years ago, Michael needed me when he was 8, when he was 18, when he was struggling. I had been there. Now he needed something else. Not his mother. A solution. And I could not become one. Before hanging up, I said, if Robert changes his mind, it will be his decision. She whispered, you could save everything. I answered softly, no. I looked at the empty chair beside Daniel's photograph. Michael has to save himself. That night, my phone remained silent. No messages, no calls, no explanations, only quiet. But somewhere across Chicago, Michael sat in an expensive office, watching the largest deal of his career slowly begin to slip away. And for the first time in his life, money could not solve the problem. Because Robert Hayes was no longer asking about buildings. He was asking about character. And my son did not yet understand the difference. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. For years, that had been my habit. When you spend most of your life working 2 jobs, your body never completely forgets. I made coffee, opened the curtains, watered the plants beside my kitchen window. Everything looked normal, yet nothing felt normal anymore. At 10 o'clock, I drove to a small restaurant near the river. Robert Hayes had chosen the place. It wasn't expensive. No private dining room, no crystal glasses, no investors, just a quiet restaurant with wooden tables and old photographs on the walls. When I arrived, Robert was already there. He stood as I approached. "Mrs. Collins?" "Please call me Barbara," he smiled. "Only if you call me Robert." For the first time since the dinner, I felt comfortable. We ordered coffee. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Finally, Robert reached into his briefcase. He removed an old envelope. The paper had yellowed with age. "My father kept this for over 30 years. He carefully opened it. Inside were several photographs. My hands began to tremble. One photograph showed 2 men standing beside construction equipment. One of them was Daniel, younger, smiling, the same smile Michael once had. My eyes filled with tears. "Oh my God," Robert nodded. "My father carried these everywhere." I picked up the photograph. Daniel looked exactly as I remembered him. Strong shoulders, gentle eyes, work boots covered in dirt. The man I had loved, the man I had buried. For a moment, I forgot where I was. I simply stared at him. Robert spoke quietly. "My father met Daniel in 1988. I looked up. The company my father worked for was collapsing. I listened. There was an accident at one of their sites. My fingers touched the photograph. Daniel mentioned something. Robert nodded. Insurance companies refused to pay. What happened? My father was going to lose everything. I remembered a few late nights. Daniel coming home exhausted. Phone calls, meetings, long drives. At the time, he told me very little. He always protected me from worry. Robert continued. Your husband spent months helping him. I looked down. He never told me. My father offered him money. That sounded exactly like Daniel. He refused. I smiled through tears. That also sounds like Daniel. Robert leaned back. My father said Daniel saved our family. The words felt too large, too important. For decades, I had believed Daniel lived an ordinary life, worked hard, raised a family, paid bills, loved his wife, loved his son. Now I was learning that he had changed another family's future. Robert reached into the envelope again. This time he removed a letter. The handwriting is my father's. I carefully unfolded it. The date was nearly 30 years old. Dear Daniel, you gave my family something I can never repay. If my son ever becomes successful, I will make sure he remembers your kindness. My vision blurred. Robert spoke softly. My father died 12 years ago. I folded the letter carefully. He never forgot your husband. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, I asked, why didn't Daniel tell me? Robert smiled. My father used to ask the same question. And He said good deeds stop being good deeds when people use them to impress others. That sounded exactly like Daniel. I suddenly remembered something. One evening, many years ago, Daniel had sat beside Michael's bed. Michael was perhaps 6. He asked, "Dad, what makes someone rich?" Daniel answered, "Being able to sleep at night." At the time, Michael laughed. He didn't understand. Perhaps neither did I. Robert broke the silence. "Your husband shaped my father's life." I looked at him. My father built our company because Daniel helped him survive. He hesitated, which means, in some ways, Daniel helped build my future too. The room became quiet. Outside, people walked beside the river. Cars passed. Life continued. Yet my husband somehow sat beside us. Through memories, through photographs, through gratitude. Robert finally asked, "Did Michael know any of this?" I shook my head. "No." "Why not?" I looked down. Life happened. Daniel died. Bills arrived. Work consumed everything. Michael grew up. And somewhere along the way, stories disappeared. Robert nodded slowly. "My father told me something before he died." I waited. He said that character always reveals itself when money enters the room. I thought about the dinner, the insults, the silence. Michael lowering his eyes, Vanessa smiling. Robert continued. "Friday night told me a great deal." My heart tightened. "About Michael?" He nodded. I remained quiet. "Barbara, your son is talented." I said nothing. "Smart." Again, silence. "He may even become very successful." I looked at him. "But—" Robert folded his hands. "I watched his wife humiliate you." The restaurant suddenly felt very quiet. I watched him allow it. I lowered my eyes. Robert's voice softened. "My father taught me to judge people by how they treat those who can do nothing for them." I could not answer. Because he was right. He continued. "I don't invest only in buildings." His eyes met mine. "I invest in people." I understood then. This wasn't about Daniel. Not entirely. This was about Michael, about character, about values, about the things Daniel once taught. Robert looked out the window. "My father used to say that the quickest way to understand a man is to watch him with his mother." The words pierced my heart because I had spent years making excuses. Success, pressure, marriage, business. Now an outsider had seen the truth in one evening. I finally asked, "Have you decided?" He looked back at me. "No." The answer surprised me. "I haven't." I remained silent. He continued. "But I know one thing." "What?" "I won't ignore what I saw." For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Robert smiled gently. "Your husband would be very proud of you." Tears filled my eyes again. "I don't know." "He would." I looked down at the silver brooch. The same brooch Vanessa had mocked. The same brooch Robert recognized. The same brooch Daniel had given me. "Wear this and remember who you are." For the first time in years, I finally understood. The brooch was never about jewelry. It was about identity, about values, about remembering where we came from. And somewhere across Chicago, my son was about to discover that money cannot buy back character once it has been lost. I sat in my car for nearly 20 minutes after leaving the restaurant. Robert's words stayed with me. "I don't invest only in buildings. I invest in people." For years, I had blamed myself for Michael's changes. Perhaps I had worked too much. Perhaps I had protected him too much. Perhaps I had failed somewhere. But sitting there beside the river, something slowly became clear. Children eventually become responsible for the people they choose to become. Parents can teach. They can sacrifice. They can love. But they cannot make choices forever. I drove home slowly. The afternoon sun had finally appeared. Chicago looked beautiful. People hurried down sidewalks. Construction cranes moved above the skyline. Life continued. My phone rang. Michael. Again. This time I answered. Mom? His voice sounded exhausted. Yes. Can I come by tonight? I hesitated. Why? I need to talk. About Robert? Silence. That silence answered everything. Finally, he said, partly. I closed my eyes. What else? Another pause. I don't know what's happening. I almost told him. I almost said that his father's kindness was standing in the middle of his deal. But it wasn't my story to tell. Not yet. You need to figure that out yourself. Mom. What? Did you meet Robert today? The question surprised me. Yes. His breathing changed. What did he say? I looked out my windshield. He talked about your father. Silence. Long silence. My father. Yes. I don't understand. Neither do I. That part was true. He lowered his voice. He canceled another meeting. When? Tomorrow. I felt my heart sink. The project was slipping away, and for the first time, Michael sounded frightened. Not angry, not defensive, frightened. I've spent 18 months on this deal. I said nothing. Our company needs it. Again, silence. Then he asked, Did you tell him what happened at dinner? No. Did you ask him to pull out? No. His voice cracked slightly. Then why is this happening? I answered quietly. Maybe because he saw what happened himself. The line became silent. Sometimes the truth needs no explanation. That evening, Michael came to my house. It was nearly 7. The same house Vanessa called modest. The same house Michael had once called home. When I opened the door, he looked exhausted. His tie was loose. His eyes were red. For the first time in years, he looked older than his age. Come in. He sat at the kitchen table, the same table where he had done homework, the same table where Daniel once paid bills, the same table where I had cried after the dinner. I made coffee. Neither of us spoke. Finally, he looked around the room. Everything was exactly the same. The clock, the photographs, the curtains, the old wooden cabinets. He spoke softly. I haven't been here in a while. No. He lowered his eyes. I guess not. For several moments, the only sound was the clock. Tick, tick, tick. Then he looked at one of Daniel's photographs. Dad was young there. He was 38. Michael stared at the picture. I barely remember his voice. That hurt. But I understood. He had been only 8. I remember him carrying me. He loved doing that. Another silence. He finally looked at me. Robert knew him. Apparently. Michael rubbed his forehead. He said something strange yesterday. What? He said your father left a better inheritance than money. I looked at Daniel's picture. That sounded exactly like him. Michael's voice became softer. Mom, what kind of man was Dad? The question almost broke me, because he should have known. But life had moved too quickly. Success had replaced stories. And somewhere along the way, a son forgot his father. He was kind. Michael looked down. He worked hard. Another pause. He respected people. The kitchen became quiet. Finally, I added, he would have defended me. Michael's eyes lifted immediately. Pain appeared on his face. Real pain, perhaps for the first time since the dinner. He swallowed. Mom. No. My voice remained calm. You asked what your father was like. I looked directly at him. He would have stood up. He lowered his eyes. For several moments, he said nothing. Then, I made a mistake. I waited. I thought if I ignored it, things would calm down. Why? Because the deal mattered. There it was. The truth. No excuses, no business language, no explanations. Only truth. The deal mattered. I nodded. More than me. His eyes filled with tears. No. But in that moment, he couldn't answer. Because he already knew. The front door suddenly opened. Both of us looked up. Vanessa entered. She looked surprised to see me. Then she looked at Michael. There you are? Michael stood. What are you doing here? She folded her arms. You left your phone. Her eyes moved toward me. The atmosphere immediately changed. She looked uncomfortable, almost nervous. I've been calling. Michael said nothing. She looked at him. Robert's office called. His face changed. What? They want a meeting tomorrow morning. My heart began to beat faster. Michael stared at her. What kind of meeting? They wouldn't say. The kitchen suddenly felt smaller. Vanessa finally looked at me. Did you know about this? No. She didn't seem convinced. Michael sat down again. His hands shook slightly. Vanessa spoke carefully. This could still work. No one answered. She looked at me. Barbara? I met her eyes. If you spoke to Robert, Michael interrupted her. Stop. She looked surprised. What? Stop. The room became silent. For the first time he had said the word. To her, not to me. She looked confused. I'm trying to help. No. His voice remained calm. You're trying to fix something you helped break. She stared at him. And I realized something. For the first time since the dinner, Michael was finally beginning to see. Not the deal. Not the money. The damage. The silence. The truth. Vanessa picked up his phone. We should go. He remained seated. I'm staying. She looked stunned. Michael. I'm staying. She left 15 minutes later. The front door closed. The house became quiet again. My son sat across from me. Not a businessman, not a CEO, not an investor, simply a tired man sitting at his mother's kitchen table. And before he left that night, he looked at Daniel's photograph one last time. Then he quietly said something I had waited years to hear. I think Dad would be disappointed in me. I barely slept after Michael left. His final words stayed with me. I think Dad would be disappointed in me. For years, I had waited to hear my son speak honestly. Not like a businessman, not like a husband, not like a man protecting his image, simply as a son. That night, for the first time in years, I saw him struggling with himself. The next morning arrived cold and gray. Chicago looked exactly as it had the day after Daniel's funeral, quiet, heavy, as if the city itself understood loss. At 8 o'clock, Michael sent me a message. Meeting Robert at 9. Nothing else. No explanation. No confidence. No promises. I made coffee and sat beside the kitchen window. The silver brooch rested beside me. Daniel's photograph stood nearby. For some reason, I found myself speaking aloud. "Your son needs you today." The clock ticked quietly. I remembered Daniel's voice. Character shows itself when something important is at risk. Today, something very important was at risk. At 10:30, my phone rang. Michael. I answered immediately. His breathing sounded uneven. "Mom." What happened? Several seconds passed. Then, he ended it. My heart sank. The deal? Yes. I closed my eyes. $30 million. 18 months of work. Hundreds of meetings. Gone. Michael spoke again. He wouldn't sign. I remained silent. He said he couldn't move forward. His voice sounded hollow. Why? Another long silence. Then, he talked about Dad. I sat down. What did he say? Michael swallowed. He said his father taught him to invest in people. I listened quietly. He said business partnerships require trust. My hands trembled slightly. He said he watched me remain silent while my wife humiliated my mother. The kitchen suddenly felt very quiet. He said if I couldn't protect my own family, he couldn't trust me to protect a partnership. I closed my eyes. Daniel, Robert, character. Everything had come together. Michael continued. He said money reveals priorities. I could hear him breathing. He asked me one question. What? His voice cracked. Would your father recognize the man you've become? Tears filled my eyes, not because of the deal, because of the question. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then Michael quietly said, I couldn't answer. I looked at Daniel's photograph. Neither could I. After the call ended, I sat alone for nearly an hour. Part of me felt sorry for my son. Part of me felt angry. Part of me felt relieved. Because for the first time in years, consequences had arrived. Money had failed. Status had failed. Success had failed. And all that remained was truth. Around noon, Vanessa called. Her voice was shaking. He lost everything. I remained silent. This project was supposed to change our company. Again, silence. She finally said, Robert destroyed us. No. My voice surprised even me. He didn't. She inhaled sharply. He walked away. You know what I mean? Yes. I looked out the window. But you don't. She said nothing. I continued. Robert didn't create this. Barbara, you humiliated me. Silence. You told everyone I didn't belong. Her breathing became uneven. You treated me like a problem, she whispered. I was trying to help Michael. I closed my eyes. No. My voice remained calm. You were trying to impress people. She began crying. Actual tears, not anger, not frustration, fear. Because for the first time, Appearances had failed her. She asked quietly, "Can you help us?" There it was, the question everyone eventually reaches. Can you help us? Years earlier, Daniel had helped a stranger. Years later, Robert remembered. But help cannot be demanded. It can only be offered. I answered honestly. I don't know. She began crying harder. This changes everything. I thought about that. Yes, it did. An hour later, Michael arrived. He looked worse than the previous evening. His tie was gone. His eyes were swollen. His shoulders had collapsed. The businessman was gone. Only the son remained. He sat at the kitchen table again. Neither of us spoke. Finally, he said, "He was right." I waited. "Robert." He looked down. "He said I cared more about the deal than my mother." Tears rolled down his face. He was right. For years, I had imagined this moment, my son finally seeing, finally understanding. Yet it brought no satisfaction, only sadness. He looked at Daniel's photograph. I don't know when I changed. I spoke softly. Neither do I. He wiped his eyes. I kept telling myself I was doing it for us. For who? My family. I nodded. But you forgot which family, he cried quietly. The same boy who once cried over injured birds. The same child who held my hand after his father died. He finally said, I chose silence. Yes. I let Vanessa hurt you. Yes. He covered his face. And I knew it. The truth had finally arrived. Not excuses, not explanations. Truth. He looked up. Can you forgive me? I looked at my son, the little boy, the successful man, the broken man sitting before me. Forgiveness is complicated. People think it happens immediately. It doesn't. Some wounds need honesty first. Some wounds need time. I answered carefully. I love you. He nodded slowly. But love and forgiveness are not the same. He lowered his eyes. I understand. I reached across the table. For the first time in years, I took his hand. The same hand I once held crossing streets. The same hand I held at his father's funeral. He began crying again. I lost everything. I squeezed his hand. No. He looked up. Yes. I shook my head. No? I looked toward Daniel's photograph. You lost a deal. The room became quiet. Then I spoke the words I had finally learned. You still have a chance not to lose yourself. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Outside, snow had begun to fall. Very lightly. The first snow of the season. Michael watched it through the window. Then he quietly asked, Do you think Dad would have forgiven me? I looked at Daniel's picture. The gentle smile, the kind eyes, the man who helped strangers, the man who never kept score. And I finally answered, Your father would ask what kind of man you want to become next. The days after Michael lost the deal felt strangely quiet. No investors, no urgent phone calls, no business dinners, no expensive restaurants. Only silence. Sometimes silence is punishment. Sometimes it is healing. For Michael, it became both. 3 days after our conversation, he returned to my house. This time, he arrived without a suit, without a briefcase, without his expensive watch. He wore jeans, an old jacket. For a moment, he looked like the young man who used to mow my lawn during college. He stood on the porch. "Can I help with anything?" I looked at him. The question felt unfamiliar. "What?" "The house." I almost smiled. "The gutters need cleaning." He nodded. "I can do that." The weather had become colder. Leaves covered the yard. The old maple tree Daniel planted years ago stood beside the driveway. Michael climbed the ladder. For nearly 2 hours he cleaned leaves from the gutters. He repaired a broken downspout. He swept the sidewalk. Neither of us spoke very much. Sometimes people need work before they find words. When he finally came inside, his hands were dirty. His face was tired. I placed coffee on the kitchen table. He looked around the room. "I forgot how quiet it is here." "Yes." He stared at the clock. "I used to hate that clock." I smiled. "You said it was too loud." He laughed softly. "I couldn't sleep." The laughter disappeared quickly. He looked down. "I haven't slept in days." I knew why. Failure keeps people awake. Regret keeps them awake longer. He finally asked, "Did Robert call again?" "Yes." His eyes lifted. "What did he say?" "He asked about your father." Michael leaned back. "He talks about Dad more than I do." The truth hurt both of us. For years, Michael had built office towers, investment plans, business strategies. But he had never rebuilt his relationship with the man he lost. He spoke quietly. "I barely remember him." I stood and walked toward a cabinet. Inside was an old wooden box. I had not opened it in years. I placed it on the table. Michael looked confused. "What is this?" "Your father." Inside were photographs, letters, baseball tickets, old report cards, birthday cards. Michael carefully picked up a picture. He was 6 years old. Daniel carried him on his shoulders. "I remember this." I smiled. "The county fair." He picked up another photograph. Daniel teaching him to ride a bicycle. Another. The two of them fishing. Another. Michael asleep on Daniel's chest. His hands began shaking. "I forgot these existed." "No." I looked at him. "You forgot to remember." Tears filled his eyes. For nearly an hour, we looked through the box. Some photographs made him laugh. Others made him cry. Then, he found a folded piece of paper. His father's handwriting. Daniel had written it several weeks before his death. Michael read silently. Then his voice broke. "What is this?" I had forgotten about the letter. Daniel had written it after Michael's 8th birthday. It was meant for later, for adulthood, for life. Michael began reading aloud. "If you ever become successful, remember that people are more important than money." His breathing became uneven. "Respect your mother." He stopped reading. Tears rolled down his face. "She will give you more than anyone else in your life." He lowered the paper. The kitchen became silent. The clock continued ticking. He whispered, "I failed him." I sat beside him. "No." He looked at me. "Yes." I shook my head. "You forgot him." He looked down. "There's a difference." He covered his face. "I became someone I don't recognize." For several moments, neither of us spoke. Finally, he said, "I blamed pressure." I listened. "I blamed business." He looked toward the window. "I blamed Vanessa." He swallowed. "But I made those choices." I nodded, because this was the truth he needed. Not excuses, responsibility. That evening, his phone rang. He looked at the screen. Vanessa. He didn't answer. A minute later, another call, then another. Finally, he answered. I'll be home later. Silence. No. Longer silence. I said no. I had never heard him speak to her like that. His voice remained calm. I'm with my mother. The room became quiet. He listened. Then, no. Another pause. Because she deserves better than that. He ended the call. I said nothing. He looked embarrassed. She wants to move forward. Do you? He stared at the old photographs. I don't know. For the first time, he was questioning his marriage. Not because of money, not because of the deal, because of values. Several days later, Robert called him. They met privately. When Michael came to my house afterward, he looked different, calmer, sadder. What happened? He sat at the kitchen table. He told me about his father. I waited. He said his father spent 30 years talking about Dad. His eyes filled again. He said one act of kindness built their entire family. I looked at Daniel's picture. That sounded like him. Michael continued. Robert said he saw Dad sitting at that dinner table. I remained silent. He said he also saw me. He lowered his eyes. And he didn't like what he saw. The room became quiet. I finally asked, did he offer the deal again? Michael slowly shook his head. No. Are you angry? He thought for several seconds. Then, no. I looked surprised. He smiled sadly. For the first time in my life, I think I needed to lose. Outside, snow continued falling. The neighborhood looked peaceful. He picked up his father's letter again. His fingers rested on the words. Respect your mother. Finally, he looked at me. What do I do now? I thought about Daniel, Robert, the silver brooch, 40 years of marriage, 30 years of widowhood. One terrible dinner, one lost deal, and one son finally finding his way home. I answered quietly, become the man your father believed you already were. Winter arrived early that year. Snow covered the sidewalks. The maple tree outside my house stood bare against the gray sky. Everything looked quieter, slower. For the first time in months, I found myself enjoying the silence. Michael continued visiting, sometimes twice a week, sometimes only once. He helped around the house, fixed the fence, changed light bulbs, shoveled snow, small things, ordinary things, the kind of things his father used to do. But forgiveness is not built through chores. It is built through truth. One evening, he arrived carrying groceries. He placed them on the kitchen counter. I bought too much. I smiled. You always did. He laughed softly. For several minutes, we worked quietly. Then he suddenly asked, did you ever hate me? The question surprised me. I looked at him. No. Not even after the dinner, I thought carefully. I was hurt, but not angry. Oh, I was angry. He lowered his eyes. I deserved that. I placed 2 cups of coffee on the table. Anger isn't the same as hate. He sat quietly. I hate what I became. I shook my head. No. He looked confused. You hate seeing it. The kitchen became quiet. Snow fell outside the window. He finally spoke. Vanessa moved into her sister's house. This was the first time he had mentioned her in days. Are you separated? I don't know. Do you love her? He stared at his coffee. I don't know that either. The answer sounded honest, perhaps for the first time. He continued. We've barely spoken. I listened. Everything became about the deal. He rubbed his forehead. She says Robert ruined us. I said nothing. She says you turned him against me. I looked at him. What do you think? He was quiet for a long time. Finally, I think I turned him against me. Those words mattered, because responsibility had finally arrived. No more excuses, no more blame, just truth. Several days later, Robert called me. Barbara? Hello, Robert. I wanted you to know something. I sat down. What is it? I met with Michael again. My heart tightened. How did it go? He paused. He apologized. I remained silent. He didn't apologize for losing the deal. That surprised me. He apologized for his mother. I closed my eyes. Robert continued. He told me he had forgotten who he was. Tears filled my eyes. He also told me about your husband's letter. I smiled. Daniel, still teaching. Even now. Robert's voice softened. Your husband raised a good man. I looked toward Daniel's photograph. He lost his way. Yes. But perhaps he's finding it. After the call ended, I sat quietly. Sometimes healing happens very slowly. So slowly that you only notice it when you look backward. A week before Christmas, Michael asked me to dinner. Just the two of us. At a small restaurant near the neighborhood where he grew up. Not downtown. Not expensive. Not impressive. When we arrived, I immediately recognized it. The old Italian restaurant where Daniel used to take us. Michael smiled. I wasn't sure you'd remember. I looked around. The red booths, the old photographs, the smell of bread. I remember everything. We sat quietly. Neither of us needed to impress anyone. Halfway through dinner, Michael reached into his coat. He removed an envelope. What's this? He pushed it toward me. Inside was a check, a very large check. I looked at him. What is this? The amount you paid for my college. I stared at him. Michael. I calculated everything. My hands trembled. The ring. I looked up. What? The wedding ring. My breathing stopped. I found the receipt in your old papers. I had never told him, not once. His eyes filled with tears. You sold Dad's ring. I could not speak. So I could go to school. People around us continued eating. Nobody knew our world had stopped. He wiped his eyes. I spent years building buildings. His voice shook. And I never saw what you built. I reached across the table. No. He looked at me. You built yourself. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he quietly said, I asked Vanessa for a divorce. I felt surprised, not because of the decision, because of how calm he sounded. Are you sure? He nodded. We became people I don't recognize. I listened. I don't hate her. Good. But I can't continue pretending. The restaurant felt warm, safe, like the past. He continued. She said losing the deal changed me. I smiled slightly. Did it? He thought carefully. No. He looked directly at me. Losing you changed me. My eyes filled with tears, because this was the apology I had waited for. Not words, understanding. The snow outside continued falling. When dinner ended, we stood beside our cars. The cold air surrounded us. Michael looked up at the sky, then at me. Do you forgive me? The question had finally returned. Not after the deal, not after the failure, after the truth, after the work, after the change. I thought about Daniel, the hospital room, the promise. Raise our boy to be kind. For a long moment, I said nothing. Then I answered. I forgive you. Tears rolled down his face. But... He nodded. He already understood. I won't forget. He lowered his eyes. I know. I touched his cheek. The silence hurt. I know. And trust takes time. I know. For the first time since that terrible dinner, I hugged my son. Not the businessman, not the failed executive, not the man who lost $30 million. My son. The little boy who once held my hand at his father's funeral. The man finally learning what his father tried to teach him. As we stood there in the falling snow, Michael whispered something that made me cry. I think Dad would recognize me again. Christmas arrived quietly that year. Snow covered the neighborhood. Lights appeared on porches. Children built snowmen in front yards. For the first time in many years, I wasn't afraid of the holidays. After Daniel died, Christmas became difficult. Every decoration carried a memory. Every song reminded me of him. Every empty chair felt larger. But this year felt different. Not because life had become perfect. It hadn't. Michael and Vanessa remained separated. The divorce papers had not yet been filed. His company was still struggling after losing Robert's investment. Many things remained uncertain, but truth had finally entered our family, and truth changes everything. 3 days before Christmas, Michael arrived carrying several boxes. What are these? He smiled. Christmas decorations. I looked surprised. You hate decorating. I used to. He laughed softly. Dad loved it. I smiled. Yes, he did. For the next several hours, we decorated the house together. The old ornaments came out of storage. Some were broken. Some had faded. Some dated back nearly 40 years. Michael found a small wooden ornament, a little baseball player. His face softened. Dad made this. He stayed up half the night. Michael laughed. It looks terrible. It does. For the first time in months, we laughed together. Real laughter. Not forced, not polite. The kind that belongs to family. That evening, while placing lights on the tree, Michael suddenly spoke. I visited Dad's grave. I turned toward him. Yesterday. My heart tightened. What did you say? He looked down. I apologized. The room became quiet. I told him I forgot who he was. Tears filled my eyes. I told him I forgot who I was. He placed another ornament on the tree. And then, he smiled sadly. I sat there for almost an hour. Outside, snow fell softly. I think he already knew. I looked toward Daniel's photograph. Perhaps he did. Christmas Eve arrived. Michael spent the entire day at my house. We cooked together, wrapped gifts, watched old movies. For the first time in years, he turned off his phone. No business calls, no emails, no meetings, only family. Late that afternoon, there was a knock at the door. Michael opened it. Vanessa stood outside. Snow covered her coat. For several seconds, nobody spoke. She looked tired, very tired. Not elegant, not polished, simply tired. She looked at me. "May I come in?" I nodded. She entered quietly. For several minutes, none of us spoke. Finally, she looked at me. "I owe you an apology." I remained silent. She continued. "What I did was cruel." Her voice trembled. "I thought success meant becoming better than people." Tears appeared in her eyes. "I thought appearances mattered." She looked down. "I was wrong." Michael remained silent. She turned toward him. "I hurt you too." He nodded. She wiped her eyes. "I don't expect forgiveness." I looked at her. For the first time, she seemed honest. No performance, no image, only regret. She spoke quietly. "When the deal collapsed, I blamed everyone." She looked at me. "Especially you." I said nothing. "But the truth is that I was ashamed." "Of what?" Her eyes filled again. "Where I came from." "That surprised me," she continued. "My father lost his business when I was young." I listened. We struggled. Her voice shook. "I promised myself I would never feel poor again." Suddenly, I understood. Not completely, but enough. Fear had built her life. Fear of failure. Fear of judgment. Fear of returning to her past. She whispered, "And I judged you because you reminded me of things I wanted to forget." The room became quiet. Michael looked at her. Neither of them spoke. Finally, I said, "Pain does not excuse cruelty." She nodded. "I know." For several moments, nobody moved. Then she asked, "Can you forgive me someday?" I thought carefully. Because forgiveness deserves honesty. "I don't know." She nodded. "But I appreciate the truth." Tears rolled down her face. That evening, she left quietly. Michael walked her to the door. Neither of them knew what would happen next. Perhaps divorce. Perhaps reconciliation. Perhaps something else. But for the first time, both of them were honest. And honesty gives people a chance. Christmas morning arrived. Snow covered the entire neighborhood. Michael came early. We opened gifts beside the tree. Most were simple. Books, sweaters, photographs. Then Michael handed me one final package. Inside was a small wooden frame. I looked at it. The old photograph. Daniel and Thomas Hayes, standing beside construction equipment, smiling, young, alive. At the bottom, Michael had written, "Character is the inheritance that never disappears." My hands trembled. "It's beautiful." He smiled. "I thought Dad should come home." Tears filled my eyes, because he had. Not through photographs, not through letters, through his son. Later that afternoon, my phone rang. It was Robert. "Merry Christmas, Barbara." Merry Christmas. He laughed softly. I wanted to tell you something. What? I spoke with Michael yesterday. I looked at my son sitting beside the tree. And Robert paused. I think Daniel would be proud. I closed my eyes, because those were the words every parent hopes to hear. Not successful, not wealthy, not important. Proud. After the call ended, Michael asked, What did he say? I smiled. He said your father would be proud. He looked away, his eyes filled with tears. Outside, church bells rang. Snow continued falling. The little house Vanessa once called modest felt warmer than any expensive restaurant, because money never built homes. People did, love did, sacrifice did. As evening approached, Michael stood beside the window. He looked at the snow, then at me. Thank you. For what? For waiting for me. I smiled softly. Mothers usually do. He nodded. But you shouldn't have had to. Perhaps that was the final lesson. Love waits, but respect must return. As I looked at my son sitting beside his father's photograph, I finally understood something. Michael had lost the biggest deal of his life, but he had found something far more valuable. His father, his family, himself. And sometimes, losing millions is the price people pay to discover what they should have protected all along. There is a lesson I learned far too late. Success can buy houses, cars, and business deals, but it cannot buy back a moment of silence when someone you love needed you to speak. For many years, I believed sacrifice guaranteed gratitude. I believed that if a parent gave enough, loved enough, and worked hard enough, their children would always remember where they came from. Life does not always work that way. Children grow. People change. Money changes priorities. Pride changes relationships. Sometimes the people we love lose themselves while chasing the lives they believe they deserve. But this story is not really about losing a business deal. It is about losing your way. Michael lost millions of dollars, but what truly frightened him was realizing he had become a man his father would not recognize. And perhaps many of us experience moments like that in our own lives. The good news is that people can change. Not because they lose money, not because they face consequences, but because they finally choose honesty. Forgiveness is not forgetting. Healing is not pretending nothing happened. Real healing begins when people accept responsibility, tell the truth, and decide to become better than they were yesterday. Daniel left his son no fortune. He left him character. And in the end, that inheritance became more valuable than any investment contract. If you are a parent, never underestimate the example you leave behind. If you are a son or daughter, remember that your parents grow older while waiting for your phone calls, your visits, and your kindness. And if you have made mistakes, remember this. As long as there is honesty, there is still hope. As long as there is humility, there is still healing. As long as there is love, families can sometimes find their way home again. If Barbara's story touched your heart, please share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever experienced a moment when someone you loved chose silence instead of standing beside you? I'd also love to know where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. If stories about family forgiveness, dignity, and second chances mean something to you, please like this video and subscribe to the channel so we can continue sharing these evenings together. And remember, sometimes the greatest loss in life is not losing money. It is forgetting the people who helped you become who you are.